Hi, I'm Tim McGuire, President of CUPE Local 79, and welcome to Local 79's third of three in our first ever budget webinar series. I want to start by thanking Beth Wilson and Social Planning Toronto for working with us on this project. Over the years, Local 79 has had a number of occasions to work with Social Planning Toronto on various issues that affect our members, but also Toronto's diverse communities. Beth is a Senior Research and Policy Analyst at Social Planning Toronto, so I'm quite happy she's able to be with us here today and through this series to talk about the 2014 operating budget. Tonight's session, or this afternoon's session, will focus on the divisions that are part of Internal Services and 311, Cluster C and 311, which you can see on the slide that we've now put up. I'll talk more specifically about what we expect from the budget as it relates to your divisions. Overall, the budget seems to be a status quo budget with a few enhancements, including a general commitment to reduce the number of gapped positions, which are positions which are funded but not filled. Local 79 can take some credit for the role we've played in pushing for a budget that promises to fill these vacancies. Local 79 was among the first to point out that in division after division, budget targets were being met through gapping and staffing vacancies. We were certainly the most vocal organization driving home the point that staff vacancies really do mean service cuts. I deputed at every single standing committee of council on this issue. The media then picked up the theme and councillors began to recognize the damage that vacancies really do to services, the services we provide to Toronto's communities in their wards. This budget and its promise to see vacancies filled reflects in part our push to make gapping an issue. That being said, there are areas where council should invest more than recommended. We'll return to this subject later. We need to keep up the pressure, and we will send you an email after the webinar with some suggestions on how you can help do that. For now, I'll turn the webinar over to Beth Wilson, who will give an overview of the budget as a whole before I talk a bit more specifically about staffing levels, gapping, and the need to ensure vacancies get posted in the various divisions you work in. At the end, we will have some time to take questions and answers. Over to you, Beth.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for inviting me. I'm really glad to join you today. So I'm going to walk us through a few slides that give a sense of the overall budget. Why is the budget important first? And I think as city workers, you know the importance of the public services that you provide to people every day and how those services shape people's lives and make a difference in Toronto. Our public services are deeply valued, and the city budget is really the place where the rubber hits the road, where council decides what the priorities are going to be and how to allocate our public funds. The city budget process is a participatory process, and I would encourage you to get involved. So I'm going to go over a couple of slides about the money. So this first slide shows where the city's revenues come from. Sometimes when we think of the city budget, we think of property taxes funding everything, but it's actually just 39% of revenues. Revenues actually come from many other sources, and you can see some of them there on the screen. Provincial funds make up 19%, and much of that are provincially mandated programs. The user fees make up 17%, and that includes revenues from TTC fares, recreation fees, and other user fees. What I want to point out on this slide is first the federal government share, and you can see it's really this tiny little slice, 1.8%. And it's true that both the federal and provincial government are not paying their fair share when it comes to things like affordable housing, childcare, and public transit. So what we want to see in this graph are those levels of government making bigger investments, making more substantial investments, and taking up a bigger share of the pie. The last thing I want to mention about this slide is that 9.598 billion figure. So that is the gross budget, and it includes revenue sources from all revenue sources, all expenditures, compared to the net budget, which includes just the property taxes. So you might have heard in the past the mayor talk about how the budget had been ballooning out of control, and he would refer to this $9 billion figure, $10 billion figure. So the important thing to know here is actually that if federal and provincial governments did pay their fair share, we would see the gross budget increase, and that would be a really good thing, and it would have no effect on property taxes because the money would be coming from federal and provincial government to pay for services. So that's gross versus net, and I'll talk about the net budget in just a moment. So this slide shows where the money goes, and you can see it's a whole variety of services, many of the services that you provide. Some of the biggest ones, I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but some of the biggest ones are TTC, as well as police, and Toronto Employment and Social Services are some of the larger areas that are funded through the budget. And this chart is interesting. It shows where our property taxes go. So this is the net budget. And you can see most of your property taxes, the biggest share, go to police services, followed by TTC, debt charges, fire services, parks, forestry and rec, transportation services, which are mostly roads, and shelter support and housing. And that top group make up 70% of the revenues from property taxes. So you see at the top that figure $3.765 billion. And that is the net budget, so the funds that come in from property taxes. And this next slide here shows the net operating budget from property taxes since amalgamation each year. And two things I want to point out about this slide. One is that basically every year you see, not every year, but almost every year, you see this modest increase over time, year after year. And it's about at the rate of inflation. So we don't see in the net operating budget these huge out of control increases. The other thing to mention is if you look at the last three bars from the current term of council under Mayor Ford, the net operating budget actually went up each of those 3 years, and will likely go up in this fourth year as well. These are some of the key dates for the budget process. So just to let you know, the budget that's been released now is the staff recommended budget, and it goes through a process. So on Monday and Tuesday this week, the budget committee will hear public presentations, so members of the public will have their say on the budget, and then the budget committee will review the budget and they'll make their own recommendations. And that will then go to the Executive Committee on January 22nd. The Executive Committee will make its recommendations, and then the final decisions get made at City Council on January 29th and 30th. So nothing is final, nothing is written in stone until we get to the end of January when City Council meets. And I just want to address a couple of myths, some myths that you may have heard about. You may have heard Mayor Ford say that he saved the city $1 billion, and it's a very compelling statement, $1 billion, and if you repeat it often enough, it sounds true, but the numbers just don't add up. It's a bit of creative accounting. And the Toronto Star, Metro News, the Grid, and the Globe and Mail have all had a good look at these numbers and agreed that the savings figure is not correct. The slide shows some of the analysis from these media outlets talking about what's wrong with the claim. So just briefly, a couple points. The calculation doesn't include increased costs to residents like TTC fares or user fees. It counts things like the elimination of the vehicle registration tax as a savings, but it's actually a loss of revenue for the city, and it meant that the city had to find other taxes and fees to make up for that lost revenue. And they also overestimate on savings in a number of areas. One of the things that was interesting that came up this weekend was an article about Councillor Carroll. Councillor Carroll's a former budget chief for the city, and she calculated using the forward math. She calculated what the savings were under David Miller, and she came up with 1.8 billion. So there's a lot more to the story than that $1 billion figure. And this slide is just a number of other claims that the mayor has made, and I'm a pretty big fan of fact-checking, and when we do look at the facts, they just don't support many of the claims that have been made. And I think it's important to separate fact from fiction and understand what the realities actually are. So on that note, I'll hand it back to Tim. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth, and again, thank you for joining us in all three of these webinars.
Thanks.
I just want to say a few words about staffing levels before turning over to specifically what's happening in some of the divisions. As you know, to effectively deliver the services the city delivers, the city needs to be appropriately staffed, and right now it's not. Every year since this administration was elected, there have been deep budget cuts, job cuts, as well as cuts to programs and services. Since 2010, there has been a reduction in full-time staff of 2,258 positions. In 2012 alone, CUPE Local 79 saw 600 jobs lost. The year-over-year cuts to jobs through hiring freezes and contracting out mean you have been asked to do more and more with less and less. In fact, from 2011 to 2013, the average rate of staff vacancies was 4.2, and you can see a list of divisions and their staffing vacancies here. This is almost double the city's average official gapping rate of 2.4. The result is that as of June 2013, over 2,500 positions that Council had approved in its budget were left unfilled. In September, Local 79 exposed this year-in, year-out vacancy level issue and the impact these vacancies have had on services at the service level review of all of the divisions and the Board of Health. Councilors and city staff appear to have begun to listen, and we're seeing that they've taken a few yet preliminary steps to address this problem. But again, it's because Local 79 and others have been drawing attention to it. The staff recommended 2014 operating budget appears to be a status quo budget with very few targeted enhancements, but also with more contracting out. In many divisions, flatline budgets do indeed mean a cut in services because of inflationary pressures. In other divisions, the enhancements are modest and not enough to make the investments needed in some areas. So, what can you expect at internal services in 311? As is the case across the budget, the operating budgets for internal service divisions and 311 tend to settle for maintaining service levels from 2013 rather than investing in new services or in undoing cuts to existing services to help rebuild our city. There are some services that investing in some service enhancements which are good, but across the board this budget could do more for Toronto's communities. Over the next 2 months, Local 79 will be letting you know more about program and staffing changes as we get more details about the budget, and you've already seen from the chart that Beth talked about earlier the significant dates during the budget process. Right now I'm going to run quickly through a few of the divisions just to give you the broad strokes of what you can expect in some of the divisions based on the recommended budget. If I don't mention your division specifically, or if you would like more information about your division, please check the members portal over the next week as we will be posting a more comprehensive document for you to read. Okay, 311. The 2014 recommended budget for 311 states that the key challenges for 311 are the council-approved elimination of new 311 development and integration initiatives and trying to maintain service levels with no additional customer service representatives budgeted. How do you do more and meet initiatives, the goals of initiatives, if you don't staff for it? Council approved the staffing level of 182 positions at the outset of 2013, but the actual projected number of staff at year end is 161, 21 vacant positions, 11.5% far ahead of the recommended gapping level. Once again, City Council approved a certain level of staffing which has not been filled. The service levels and a staffing complement of 179.5 positions is recommended for 2014. 311 Toronto has underspent its 2013 budget because of delays in filling vacancies. The 2014 operating budget, as it is projected, states the vacant positions, excluding those held to achieve gapping targets, will be filled in 2014. On to another area, information and technology services. According to the recommended 2014 operating budget for IT, a primary focus of the division is enhancing its workforce capacity and capability. But the budget document also states that one of the key challenges and priority actions for IT is to recruit and develop talent and skills to meet changing demands and technologies. Staffing levels at IT are extremely low, and the number of vacant positions is extremely high. Of the 748 approved positions for 2013, only 577 were filled, leaving 171 vacancies. The recommended staff complement for 2014 is 766. But with a history of such exceptionally high number of unfilled positions, it seems unlikely that these positions will ever be filled. In fact, the budget documents detail problems with the division facing in terms of recruiting, largely because the city has failed to provide the resources needed to make these positions competitive with the private sector. Facilities management and real estate. The facilities management and real estate budget is a flatline budget in terms of how much they are spending and the divisions they are spending and the services the division will provide. The budget recommends creating 31 new positions, although most of them are likely to be in management. One area the budget is silent on, but where we know movement is happening, is the issue of contracting out of custodial services. In October, staff issued a request for quotations for contracting out custodial services at a number of daycares and 703 Don Mills. By working with several councillors, especially Pam McConnell, we were able to put a stop to this process. We expect it to come back next year, and we will continue to fight to keep good, high-quality municipal cleaning jobs in place. So those are the areas I'm going to cover. I've covered now. There are many other areas in this section in internal services. They will be posted in the document we're going to put on the members portal. So as we continue to monitor the divisions and use of gapping to meet their budget targets, we'll post more information. So that's the areas we'll cover for now. After the webinar, on the members portal, you will find information about a number of ways you can participate in the budget process. You will soon hear from Local 79 about important ways you can get mobilized to push for something more than a status quo budget, to push for a city that serves and enhances Toronto communities. But the most important thing you can do is fill out our survey, our staffing and service level survey, on the members portal. It should only take about 5 minutes to fill it out, but hearing your stories about the impact of gapping levels on the services you provide and on the impact on you is essential for Local 79 to advocate for a better budget. In closing, I want to point out that even though this is a status quo budget, it is not a city building budget. It leaves us well behind where we should be to undo some of the damage to services that have happened over the past 3 years. We have seen the cumulative impact that staff gapping and budget squeezes have had on our ability to deliver services to Toronto's communities. Early results from our survey on staffing levels show that an overwhelming number of you feel that your job is getting harder and more stressful than it was 4 years ago. At the same time, it is clear that CUPE Local 79 members think that City Council should invest in programs and services our communities need, and that Council should take those needs into consideration before deciding what this budget will look like in the end. To put it bluntly, we can be cautiously optimistic about this budget because at least some councillors are starting to recognize that there have been enough cuts and that the budget doesn't seek to cut the gap positions. But we have lots more work to do before this budget process is done. Local 79 will continue to urge Council to look closely at all the divisions where there have been extreme gapping levels in the past and to fill the vacant positions for the delivery of services. We'll also monitor the 2014 budget process as it unfolds for potential cuts to jobs, services, and any threats of contracting out. So thank you for participating in our first budget webinar series. This is the final of 3. You will receive an email after the webinar with all the links to enable you to engage the budget and contribute to the 2014 operating budget. We will be happy now to answer any questions you may have.